Hello po sa inyong lahat. Ang i-discuss ko ngayon ay ang different accounting concepts and principles, which are some of the generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP in the Philippines. Ano nga ba ang GAAP? Sabi dito, it represent the rules, procedures, practices, and standards followed in the preparation and the presentation of financial statements. Gaya nga ng sabi ko sa inyo, ito ay parang mga batas na dapat sundin ng mga accountants sa paggawa ng financial statements. Ang GAAP ay unang dineveloped ng USA Financial Accounting Standards Board or USA FASB. Ito ang sinusunod mainly ng mga companies in the USA. Samantala, ang International Accounting Standards Board o IASB na dating International Accounting Standards Committee or IASC ang nagdevelop ng International Financial Reporting Standards or IFRS at ng International Accounting Standards o ng IAS na sinusunod naman ng European Union as well as number of countries in South America and Asia. Samantala, dito naman sa Philippines, ang Financial Reporting Standards Council o FRSC na dating Accounting Standards Council or ASC ang nagde-develop ng GAAP in the Philippines. Ang FRSC is the accounting standard setting body to assist the Board of Accountancy in carrying out its powers and functions provided under Republic Act No. 9298 or the Philippine Accountancy Act. Ito ang counterpart ng International Accounting Standards Board dito sa ating bansa. Ang GAAP in the Philippines ay dating nakabase sa USA GAAP. However, as time goes by ay napagdesisyonan ng FRSC along with the Board of Accountancy na mag-shift tayo into IFRS at IAS. Dahil dito ay na-developed ang PFRS o ang Philippine Financial Reporting Standards which were based from International Financial Reporting Standards at inadapt din ng FRSC ang ginawa noon ng Accounting Standards Council na Philippine Accounting Standards na base naman sa International Accounting Standards. Sa kasalukuyan, ang PFRS at ang PAS o ang PAS ang highest hierarchy o ang pinakasinusunod na GAAP in the Philippines. Bago ko i-discuss ang different accounting concepts and principles, ay gusto ko munang malaman nyo ang meaning ng mga terms na ito. Dahil mababanggit ko ito sa discussion mamaya. Una ay ang net book value. Ito yung value ng non-current asset like equipment, furniture, and fixtures kapag binawas mo ang accumulated depreciation nila. Next is the fair market value. Ito yung current market price ng asset o kung magkano ang halaga niya sa market kapag binenta. Ang net realizable value naman ay ang accounts receivable less allowance for doubtful account. Ang contra asset account naman is an asset account where the account balance is a credit balance. So ibig sabihin, ibinabawas ito sa asset na kasama niya dahil ang normal balance ng asset is debit. Kaya siya tinatawag na contra asset. For example ay yung accumulated depreciation. It is a contra asset account dahil binabawas siya sa fixed assets like equipment. Example din is ang allowance for doubtful account dahil binabawas siya sa accounts receivable. Next is the term overstated, meaning the reported amount is more than the true or correct amount. So sobra siya. Ang understated naman, the amount is less than the true amount, meaning kulang siya. Ang termination naman is the point in time when all business affairs are ended, or ito ang tuluyang pagsasara ng business. Now, let's proceed to the accounting concepts and principles. Itong mga i-discuss ko ay ilan lang sa mga principles, concepts, assumptions, and standards na sinusunod in preparing and presenting financial statements. Ito ang ilan sa mga GAAP in the Philippines. First is the conservatism principle. Sabi rito, assets and income should not be overstated, while liabilities and expenses should not be understated. It is also known as prudence principle. Sabi rin dito, i-record mo lahat ng expenses and liabilities, certain or uncertain, sigurado ka man o hindi, as soon as possible, but recognizes the revenues and assets when they are assured of being received. Dito naman, kailangan sigurado ka. And in case of doubt, record any loss and do not record any gain. Sabi nga, don't count your chicks until the eggs hatch. Meaning, wag mong i-record ang revenue or assets kung hindi ka pa naman sigurado dito or hindi mo pa ito natatanggap o nakikita mismo. Reason, bakit ba may gantong principle? It adheres to the true and fair presentation of the financial amounts of all financial statements. Example nito, kaya tayo mayroong allowance for bad debt or allowance for doubtful account, which is a contra-asset account, ay para hindi ma-overstate ang accounts receivable. Dahil hindi naman lahat ng accounts receivable ay sure tayong makokolekta natin. Kaya naglalagay tayo ng allowance para sa mga hindi natin sure na makokolekta or yung tinatawag na doubtful expense. Di ba nga sabi sa conservatism principle, i-record mo ang expense or possible expense, sigurado ka man o hindi. Second example, if there is a choice between two acceptable asset values, the lower figure is selected. So lagi yung mas mababa ang pipiliin para maiwasan natin ang overstatement of an asset. Example din ito ang pagre-record ng depreciation expense para hindi natin ma-overstate ang mga non-cash assets like equipment, machines, furniture, and fixtures dahil as time goes by ay bumababa ang halaga ng mga ito, except syempre sa land na nag-appreciate o tumataas ang halaga. So yung third example naman, suppose an asset owned by an entity like inventory was bought for 12,000 pesos but can now buy for 5,000 pesos. Then the company must immediately write down the value of the asset to 5,000 pesos. The lower the cost of the market. Diba sabi nga, in case of doubt, record any loss and do not record any gain. But if the inventory was bought for 12,000 pesos and now cost the company for 15,000 pesos, it must still be shown as 12,000 pesos on the books. The gain is only recorded when the inventory or the asset is sold. Next is the cost or historical cost principle. Sinasabi lang dito na ang accounts sa financial statements ay dapat nakarecord in their initial cost or kung magkano yung mismong halaga ng asset nung binili mo ito, regardless kung tumaas o bumaba man ang halaga nito in the succeeding years. Kaya tinatawag itong historical cost. Reason, records that are kept based on the historical cost principle are usually considered to be more consistent dahil hindi mo nga binabago yung cost ng assets. Kung ano lang yung original cost niya, yun lang yung nakarecord hanggang sa mga susunod na taon. More reliable, more verifiable, and comparable. However, ang historical cost ay nag-a-adapt din sa conservatism principle kung saan kailangan pa rin i-record ang mga contra-asset accounts like accumulated depreciation expense and allowance for doubtful account, along with the historical cost of the asset. For example, ang furniture and fixtures ay binili ng entity sa halagang 10,000 noong 2018. Ngayong 2020 ay nagkaroon ito ng accumulated depreciation expense na 2,000 pesos. So sa balance sheet for this 2020, ang nakalagay na value ng furniture and fixtures ay ang historical cost nito na 10,000 pesos, accumulated depreciation na 2,000 pesos, kaya magiging 8,000 pesos na lang ito, which is its net book value. Tandaan, pag binawas ang accumulated depreciation sa fixed asset, ang tawag sa value na yon ay net book value. Ganon din sa accounts receivable. For example, meron kang 20,000 of accounts receivable. However, nag-record ka rin ng allowance for doubtful accounts na 5,000 pesos para sa hindi mo sure na makokolekta. Ang dapat na nakarecord na value ng accounts receivable sa balance sheet ay ang historical cost nito na 20,000 pesos less allowance for doubtful account na 5,000 pesos kaya magiging 15,000 ito, which is its net realizable value. Samantala, meron itong mga exceptions. Una, ang mga highly liquid assets or yung mga assets na madali lang i-convert into cash, tulad ng cash equivalents and marketable securities. Dahil dapat ay nakarecord ito in their fair market value at hindi sa historical or initial amount nito. For example, meron kang cash equivalent, specifically a government bond, and ang original or historical amount nito ay 100,000 pesos. However, due to inflation ay tumaas ang amount nito at naging 300,000 pesos. Yung 100,000 pesos is yung historical cost, while the 300,000 pesos is the fair market value or yung current market amount niya. Ngayon, ang i-record mo sa balance sheet is yung 300,000 pesos which is its fair market value. Dahil exception nga siya sa historical cost principle. Pangalawa sa exception ay ang financial investments dahil nire-record din sila in their fair market value. Note lang din na ang historical cost principle ay applicable usually and mostly sa mga fixed assets like equipment, furniture and fixtures, land and building. Another example of the Lakeland Bank purchases a piece of land for 500,000 pesos on January 1, 2013. Today, the fair market value of the land is roughly worth 6.5 million. The company will continue reporting the land at its historical cost of 500,000 pesos, despite the current market value of it increasing more than tenfold. Second example, XYZ company purchases a piece of equipment worth 50,000 pesos for one of its factories in 2015. Its fair market value in 2020 is around 15,000 pesos. However, the current value of the equipment on its books is 25,000 pesos. So ang nakalagay sa balance sheet mo na amount ng equipment is 25,000 pesos. At kasi nga, ina-adapt din ng historical cost principle ang conservatism principle. Dahil from 2015 to 2020 ay ginamit mo yung equipment, ibig sabihin meron ka na doong expenses na na-accumulate or yung tinatawag na accumulated depreciation expense for 5 years na nagkakahalaga na 25,000 pesos. So, kailangan yung ibawas sa historical cost ng equipment. So, 50,000 minus 25,000 is 25,000. Next is the going concern principle. Sabi rito, in the absence of evidence to the contrary, the accounting entity is viewed as continuing in operation indefinitely. Reason, without this principle, businesses would not have the ability to make prepayments or accrue expenses. After all, the company might not be there long enough to realize future expenses. Similarly, the concepts of depreciating and amortizing assets are hinged on the idea that the business can continue its operations well into short-term future. Dahil nga sa concept na ito, kaya tayo may tinatawag na prepaid and accrued expenses. Prepaid, ibig sabihin, nabili mo na pero di mo pa nagagamit. While the accrued expense ay nagamit mo na pero di mo pa nababayaran. So nire-record natin ang prepaid expense dahil hindi pa naman natin ito nagagamit at gagamitin pa lang natin ito sa mga susunod na araw or in the future. While nire-record natin ang accrued expense dahil ina-assume natin na mababayaran naman natin ito in the succeeding days at ang business ay patuloy na mag-ooperate. Di ba nga sa going concern principle, ina-assume natin na magpapatuloy ang business indefinitely. Samantala, may mga exceptions din sa going concern principle, kung saan hindi mo na ito kailangang i-apply. Gaya ng if yung entity ay makaka-experience ng napakalaki at hindi maiiwasang pagkalugi, dahil it can result to the termination of the business. So, hindi mo na pwedeng i-assume na mag-ooperate pa ang business indefinitely. Pangalawa, kung ang business ay magsasara na, so hindi na applicable yung concept na ito. Pangatlo, kung ang entity ay bankrupt na, obviously, hindi mo na rin i-apply ang going concern principle. Ang going concern principle ang dahilan kung bakit nire-record din natin ang asset in their historical cost. Dahil nga sa going concern principle, ina-assume natin na mag-ooperate ang business indefinitely. So, lahat ng assets ng entity ay ina-assume din natin na magagamit pa natin in the succeeding years. And if magagamit pa ng entity ang assets, dapat ay nakarecord ang mga ito in their historical cost or sa case ng may mga contra-asset account ay sa net book value or net realizable value. Dahil nire-record lang natin ang fair market value ng assets if hindi na mag-ooperate ang business at ibebenta na ng entity ang assets nito sa market. Pero syempre, may exception dito. Yun yung mga binanggit ko kanina sa historical cost principle na kailangang nakarecord in their fair market value kahit na nag-ooperate pa ang business, like the cash equivalents, marketable securities, and financial investments.